Okay, so for this assignment, which is the TryHackMe report number 1, is what I'll call it, we had to go over the OWASP top 10, specifically 2021, which I realized after going through the OWASP top 10, the original one, and figuring out that most of it did not work. So I had to go back through it and just go through the 2021 edition, which went a lot smoother and had a lot more up to date information on it. But throughout the doing the entire OWASP Top 10 2021 edition, I went through and made an APA paper styled report over the entire thing, which was directed by the instructions on the assignments tab on Blackboard. So, of course, I started with the abstract, which, of course, just gives the overall summary of the paper. So, I won't focus too much on that. But with this video, I think it would be best just to go through the report and put it into audio, my thought process, and how I thought it went, just to get about 5 minutes of it. So, of course, the first steps of the OWASP top 10 2021, and same with the original one too, because I had to get through that a little bit on accident. The first steps, you have to set it up and you have to do this OpenVPN, which I have it down here. It's called OpenVPN. Yep, it's a GUI, graphics user interface, that you have to use to connect to it. That's the free version. So figured that out, got that. But the first vulnerability that we actually go through is called broken access control, which this type of vulnerability, and most of these are pulled directly from the site, not just paraphrased up a little bit. But anyways, this type of vulnerability basically allows unauthorized access to restricted areas inside of a software that you're using or inside the direct application. And the way it was the way it was shown in the room itself, in the vulnerability, especially in the practical, it showed that the exploitation of weak access controls, as stated here, to access sensitive information or perform unauthorized actions, of course. The second vulnerability that it goes into is cryptographic failures, which actually differs from the original top 10 room, because I don't think it even mentioned that. But cryptographic failures focus on the importance of effective encryption. So, weak encryption standards or weakly encrypted things are easy to just brute force in. And it was shown through that on the practical, it showed how easy it would be to brute force into something that is not encrypted or encrypted in a very weak way. As you can see, this hands-on experience highlighted the importance of secure encryption standards for both data at rest and in transit, which data at rest is, of course, data that you're not using. It's being stored, it's being saved on your files that every computer has. And then data in transit would be data that is moving across a network. So if you're interacting with an application, sending data across, IP packets are moving across, intercepting those if they're not going through any type of encryption tunnel or anything like that. Um, Similar to OWASP 10, it went over injection pretty heavily. It seems like a very important topic as well, as it has to do with SQL or SQL code, as well as command line code injections. And these attacks allow unauthorized commands to be executed. And I thought this practical was one of the best ones because it allows you to get a ton of unauthorized system information from a site that I did. And I did both of them, the one on OWASP Top 10 and the one on OWASP Top 10 2021, and they differed slightly, but they were both really good. Here we are. The fourth vulnerability covered was insecure design. This one was a little bit more confusing, but it basically emphasized the risks posed by weak security structures in an application's foundational code, which seems to me more so like something that is not, it's more of just a type of vulnerability. It's not a form of an attack in any way. So the exercise really just demonstrated how poor choices could create vulnerabilities and makes applications just harder to secure and harder to keep secure over time with updates and new additions to it. So it's much less of an attack type. The practical was much less practical. It was more just learning. Um, Security misconfiguration is the fifth one, which focused on the dangers of leaving applications configured with insecure default settings, like, for example, having your password being password, which is a very insecure default setting. And a lot of default settings are known by attackers, so that could be the very first thing that they try, and it went over that as well. The next vulnerability addressed was vulnerable and outdated components, which ties back to security misconfiguration almost, and especially insecure design, because that's basically what it is. Vulnerable and outdated components are a big security risk because things that are left unpatched and exposed become known vulnerabilities, and those known vulnerabilities can be exploited. And of course, on the site it had a big emphasis on third-party components because those can be left unpatched, and you need to stay on top of that if you are using a third-party service for your website, your application, your software, whatever it might be. Identification and authentication failures were covered next. The exercise was really good on this one and demonstrated how poor user authentication measures, such as weak password policies or poorly configured login flows, could lead to unauthorized access, just like these other ones. It's just security risk due to a vulnerability. All of these are just types of vulnerabilities. None of these really are direct attack types. These are just the vulnerabilities that can be exploited. Following this was software and data integrity failures. These introduced a new way of looking at it, more so of data and code integrity to prevent breaches and leaks and that kind of thing. It showed how people could exploit data integrity issues, which is super interesting. Of course, verifying trusted sources is important, and I learned the importance through that. Furthermore, security logging and monitoring failures was a super critical area as well. It underlined how bad logging could hinder or almost destroy like security incidents. It could almost create it. It can almost create security incidents. So this means that here, where am I? Right here. Right, and okay, the practical in this module in this room showed the necessity of robust logging systems to track suspicious activity and respond to potential breaches swiftly, which is just a part of all the frameworks that we learn about. It's just reacting when after something does happen, after prevention happens and detection goes into effect, reaction is the next step. You need to react quick enough to get it secured and maintain application security. The final vulnerability covered in this room, OWASP Top 10 2021, was server-side request forgery, which occurs when an attacker manipulates server requests to gain unauthorized access to internal resources, which this one was probably the most confusing one, and I had to use some extra outside sources that I will have listed in the reference page down here. But this was when an attacker manipulates server requests. So whenever the server is making a request, they're making it to where it almost requests the threat. It doesn't know specifically. It's just doing what it's told to do, and it's being told to do something that is causing damage to it, and it doesn't even know it. And the exercise from it allowed me to more understand the type of server-side request forgery or SSRF vulnerability, and shows the danger of unvalidated server-side requests and the need for extra request validation. This last paragraph is just a concluding paragraph about the CTFs I did along the way through the practicals and getting understanding for CTFs, because I've always thought they're super interesting. CTFs are basically just capture the flag. It's where you go through and you exploit a vulnerability like penetration testing. You go through a task, and once you do the exploitation, you prove your work by submitting that flag. And it'll be in some specified format, but it's a really cool idea. But overall, this experience with this room expanded my knowledge a bunch, and it has been the biggest jump, I would say, or biggest significance I've found with practical learning as of right now. I definitely definitely the biggest jump from just knowing theory to knowing practical, knowing how to. So this is a really good assignment. Thank you.